I'm Erica Hollingsworth, and you're listening to the F1 podcast.
What's up, everyone? It is Ricci from the F1 podcast. Today is March 12th, 2024, and we are recording season 4, episode 5. I'm here with Andrew Cleary. Andrew, how are you doing, my man?
Doing well today. It was beautiful out where I am in Canada. Good enough that I barbecued for dinner.
Oh, what was on the grill?
A little barbecue chicken with some potatoes and a little salad. It felt good to be able to go out and do that again.
So before we get into today's episode, just want to give a quick shout out to everybody who came out to Trinity Common on Saturday to watch the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Andrew, I know you couldn't make it, but we had about 16 people in our section. Over, I think it must have been like 70 plus people at the bar. Another sold out event. And honestly, it was so great. And like, shout out to like Olivia from Minnesota, who found us on social media, who was visiting Toronto for the weekend and wanted a place to watch the Formula One race other than the airport. And so she messaged us on Instagram and came watch the race. So we honestly, like, that was really appreciated. And we really appreciate our fans that have given us so much support. And we're going to be at Trinity Common as much as we can this year. I think it's been a lot of fun. And I want to shout out to Mike and his team for the hospitality he has for all of us. And I think he is planning on showing the Australian Grand Prix race in a couple of weeks. And I know that's a midnight race. So make sure to reach out to get a table or show up there.
Thankfully, the F1 has decided to restructure the count, like the timing of that race, and anybody now can be able to watch that.
We hit over 900 followers on Instagram, and we're making that road to 1,000. So keep up the support. And honestly, like, our metrics have been probably the best it's ever been lately. So really appreciate to our fans. So to start, for the first time of the 2024 season, we're going to do the fastest lap, which was a big success last year. And, you know, it actually wasn't a Red Bull driver this time. Charles Leclerc secured the fastest lap in the final laps at 1 minute and 31 seconds, 0.632. And Andrew Cleary has the honor of kicking off the season's fastest lap. And Andrew, when you are ready, I will start the timer and let's see you go through this.
All right, I am ready when you are. Just got to count me down in. I'm at a little bit of practice, but we will do our best.
3, 2, 1, go.
Well, Max Verstappen started out with the pole position and having the fastest lap in qualifying, but the story of the weekend is Ollie Bearman, who is replacing Carlos Sainz, who had appendicitis. Ollie, the third youngest driver to ever start an F1 race, and also the youngest, or I think the first debutant for Ferrari since 1972. He put his car at P11, and then the race started with Pierre Gasly being forced to retire in the first lap due to a gearbox issue. It was a fast-paced lap until lap 7 when Stroll decided to clip the wall at turn 21 and go into the barriers at turn 22, creating a safety car, which then created a barrage of pit stops in the pit lane, where unfortunately Sergio Perez was handed a 5-second penalty for an unsafe release. But then after that point, the K-Mag, the Haas boss, came out, decided to clip Albon in the wall for a 10-second penalty, overtake Sonoda, unfortunately, taking advantage for their 10-second penalties, and then decided, let's have some strategy built into it. So he decided to park the bus on everybody coming back.
Do a barrel roll.
And from there, he was able to put a masterclass in Haas defense in so that Nico Hülkenberg can then get a free pit stop while he's in his P10 position to secure a point for Haas. But overall, we had Max winning his second race of the season, followed by a nice Sergio Perez, P2, followed by I believe it's Charles Leclerc running out P3, the fastest lap. The story of the weekend is Ollie Bearman. P11 to P7, he put his F2 car on pole, didn't realize that he had to go to a race, had 1 hour free practice, and was able to finish in the points. It is the youngest debutant to finish in the points ever in F1. Very happy for him, and overall was an exciting race filled with lots of activity, lots of overtakes, and we again had a Red Bull 1-2 throughout the day.
Nice job. I'm not gonna lie, my phone froze in the middle of that, so I think you got it.
Okay.
Another dominant weekend for Red Bull. No surprise. I think the bigger story out of this, not only that Max Verstappen won another race, but also like helped show his, added to his win margin and his percentage on the podiums. But Sergio Perez, another good weekend for him per se. and other than the 5-second penalty, but it's showcasing his position so far. It's been what they've asked him to be, the P2 man, and he's been able to deliver. And
Yeah.
he was able to catch Charles Leclerc in the first couple of laps. And I think there's a lot of more talk about the V card team right now rather than the top. Mission accomplished with Sergio, and it's looking good for him right now.
Yeah, Max's 100th podium of his career there this weekend, and it was his 56th win. So by my math, it's 56% of his podiums have been wins, which if we want to talk about the greats in F1, Schumacher had a 59% conversion rate in terms of wins per podiums. And then Lewis Hamilton had 52. Now, Max has quite a ways to go in terms of, the legacy there in terms of wins. But if Max continues on this pace, he might be talking into the GOAT conversation. We don't know. But as you mentioned, Ricci, Sergio Perez has figured out what his role is on this team. And it's just to drive a consistent P2. And he's getting support from Helmut Marko, which, he wasn't getting that last year in terms of his drive. He was very much kind of kept the pace with Max, only a few tenths off because he only finished about 13 seconds behind him this week in the, in the race classification. So that was looking good. And yeah, when you're comparing him to drives, say from like Yuki Tsunoda and like even Daniel Ricciardo, I don't know how you can't have Sergio Perez not be in the number 2 seat next year. Again, just based on the first 2 races, he's looking great.
He took the blame for the 5-second penalty he received for the unsafe release. But
Sorry, that's right. You are right. So he only finished 8 seconds behind, the 5 seconds added to 13, which still put him in a P2 position. So he wasn't really that far off of Max, all things considered, at the end of the day.
No, and like he was able to wipe out that deficit with some very strong pace for a comfortable P2. And that's back-to-back second places for finishing for him to start the season, leaving him second in the driver's standings and helping Red Bull already build a healthy 30-point lead in the Constructors Champion. So it kind of goes down to now, like, this is his seat to lose, and he's got to continue this work ethic and continue to prove to be that second driver to Red Bull. And even moments like this, we get so focused on them sometimes, or I saw viewership has gone down because of the race this weekend. I don't know if it has to do because it was a Saturday race or Red Bull winning, but that doesn't matter because you get to see, sometimes when you watch races, you get to see some amazing moments like this weekend.
I just want to talk, speaking of amazing moments, we had a pretty incredible opportunity to watch a new up-and-coming driver don the seat of the red Ferrari. What was your overall thoughts when you heard, I think it was Friday, that Sainz had appendicitis? Looked like he had a speedy recovery. Thankfully, he did. He was back at the track come Sunday watching the race. So the surgery's been a success. It went well. What was your thoughts when you heard Oliver Bearman, who at the time would be the third youngest debutant in an F1 race, come and join his seat for the weekend? What were you concerned? Were you excited? Like, what were your overall thoughts going into that?
I think generally anytime that I wouldn't call it a third string, but when a reserve driver has to go in, that it's really bad for the main driver. I think Fred Vasseur even admitted that Carlos Sainz was like looking pretty weak after FP1 and FP2, that he needed help to get out of the car. So, an 18-year-old jumping into probably one of the most stressful cars on the grid, or one of the most decorative team ever. I mean, you could not ask for a better textbook, even though that maybe he kind of did get screwed a little bit in during qualifying. He could have easily made it to, I think, Q3. He would have probably been even better higher up where he ended up, but for P7, and I don't know if you saw this, Andrew, 48% of people voted that he was the driver of the day. He looked so comfortable on those hards, especially going against I think it was Lando Norris, and even I think it was Lewis Hamilton on the softs. I was a little worried because I think they started him on the softs, but I think everything kind of worked out. And once he cleared, I think it was Hulkenberg mid part of the race, he just looked comfortable. It looked like this guy he basically put himself on a plate saying, "Put me in a seat next year, coach." This guy deserves it.
Yeah, it's funny too, right? Because he was racing there already in F2 for Prema. He put his car on pole for the weekend and then found out he's like, oh, by the way, you're getting the call up to the big leagues, buddy. You know, he had 1 hour of practice, right, in a car that he has not driven outside of a sim. And when you're in racing conditions, you're actually experiencing what the dirty air is like, competing against guys. It's a whole different feeling, right? So he's learning how to drive he's learning how to drive that car while driving in the race. And the fact that he almost knocked Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time world champion, out of qualifying. He was like 300ths back of him. I think you can already start that as a great debut. But the fact that he was able to move through the field and get to P7 is incredible. And he was doing similar times to Charles Leclerc, I'm pretty sure, only a couple tenths off. So to see that he was able to kind of somewhat match his pace, just really impressive. I don't think you can ask for a better debut. I know people compare it to, like, Liam Lawson getting a seat next year sort of idea. It's kind of hard to compare the situations, right? But I think it's now time that we see some of these veteran drivers, kind of like a Danny Ricciardo. They're kind of getting a little washed up right now, and they need to get replenished with some younger drivers. And, we're looking like, they're sounding like Felipe Drugovich, right? Liam Lawson, and now Ollie Bearman has put himself in the picture as to a reason why these guys should be in F1.
Yeah, and I just a couple of things to add. Yeah, it was just 0.03 seconds behind Lewis Hamilton in terms of qualifying. And I don't know if you know, I think the two youngest drivers ever to race were actually two people on the grid. I'm going to let you see if you can guess them.
What, currently on the grid?
Yeah.
Two youngest drivers are currently on the grid.
I think it was their debut, whatever the stat was.
Oh,
but
their
actually
debut. So Max Verstappen and Lance Stroll were the two younger ones before that.
Lando Norris is number 5, but yeah, I don't know if you also noticed this. Like, just think about that. 1 hour of practice. Quote, he left feeling physically destroyed after his debut F1 race.
Well, it's true. Like, it's a different animal, F2 versus F1. But it didn't phase him, and I really appreciated that about him, is that he didn't get upset. He wasn't upset. His engineers were really calm, telling him mega job, and he was so focused on making sure he was hitting his lap times, and he kept Lando Norris behind him and Lewis Hamilton behind him for the majority of the race, and to the point where, like, when Lando and Lewis pitted late for sauce because they stayed out of the safety car and they kept I think it was medium or the hards they had, and they pit for sauce for the last 10, 15 laps. I was worried that, Ollie was going to get overtaken by them just based on the tire. But as you mentioned earlier on, he worked those hards to perfection and was able just to bang out those lap times. And he crossed the line of, about 3 seconds ahead of Norris. So it was really impressive.
I just checked because, like, I think I was reading some notes here that even Norris and Hamilton were on slight used tires, and still weren't able to, like, catch up with them. And it just wild to kind of see that. And I think, it was very appreciated, and he got a big round of applause at Trinity Common at the bar on Saturday. And so, like,
which I think it's a Ferrari bar, in my opinion. Trinity Common.
Yeah, I think it is. It might be. Well, there were a couple of McLaren fans. I mean, side note, Erica, our lovely co-host, she is back from the beautiful New Zealand, and she will appear on next week's episode. But, like, I think there are a couple Red Bulls, but I think, yeah, it's predominantly Ferrari bar. I can probably safe to say that. Sorry, everybody, that is not a Ferrari fan.
No, it's okay. There was a running joke.
I think you're the only Aston Martin. Actually, I think you and Mike.
There's a couple Aston Martin fan in there. Mike's Aston Martin fan. What are you talking about? He's wearing a shirt. But I was joking with a couple people last week that I was going to try and interview everybody at the bar that were Ferrari fans and ask them if they were a closet Max Verstappen fan.
You lose.
I think he could potentially replace one of the Haas drivers next year.
Well, I think that's what. There's been a lot of conversations, and let's get to Haas, because I thought it was quite an interesting race for them. But should Ollie have a seat next year in the sport? Yes, 100%. I know it's only one race, but to be able to do that with the car that he had, I don't see why he couldn't be, why he couldn't compete next year in a race. We're not talking like a Nick DeVries situation here. Ollie's young, he's full of energy. And I think he can perform to a level where, obviously Haas will have its limitations, but it's just, to the point where he could be consideration for Ferrari come when Lewis Hamilton contract is. Now the issue with Ferrari is that you have two drivers locked in for long term now, and you could potentially lose Ollie Bearman to another team, like another top 10, not top team, because of the situation they put yourself in.
They secured their first point of the season. I mean, Nico Hulkenberg looked like he was he drove pretty well out there. I mean, I don't know, you call that a sacrifice for Magnussen, but
he drove like a maniac. Let's be real here. I mean, he squeezed Albon into the wall on lap 14, gets a 10-second penalty there, and then not even like 6 laps later, he overtakes Tsunoda, and to the point where it was gaining an advantage, and he just never gave the place back. And I think that was part of the strategy, not to give the place back, because then he just decided to create turn his car into a bus, parked it in the middle of the road, and nobody could get around him, so that Nico can then just start building a gap. And I think he was like 2 seconds off the pace at one point of what Nico was setting, because I don't know if you could hear it on the TV, Ricci, but it sounded like he was just in high gear, like 6th or 7th gear, and not even using the electricity pack until to the point where it got to the straights. And then he would use all of his battery to stay ahead of everybody. Like really top tier thinking, top tier IQ thinking there. But the way that it kind of worked out, it's like, is it fair or is it not?
Well, like, yeah, if you're gonna stop in the middle of the track like that, I mean, that's quite questionable. I mean, it's unsafe in the end of the day. Like, that is like probably a black flag.
Well, it's not necessarily stop. You're just driving super slow, right? You're just really backing the pack up at that point.
Well, you're trying to create a DRS train of 4 or 5 cars, which we did see like for most of the race, like towards the end. But just like to kind of keep them all bunched up so they're not able to kind of move and get and catch up.
The unfortunate part though is that Haas are going to have to pull maneuvers like this year in order to score points at times.
Look, if that gets them 22 points for the season for every race, 1 point, then like it works. Because think about it, because let's look at the standings this weekend. VCAR didn't get a point this weekend. Kick Sauber didn't get a point this weekend. Alpine didn't get a point this weekend. So like, they're already doing better than half the grid.
No, I have a legit question for you in this case. So we saw that Magnussen accumulated 2 10-second penalties in the race for, unsafe driving and then gaining an advantage off track. I apologize. I know I'm not too sure if there's the rule in FIA for this, but should there be a rule where if you accumulate like X amount of number of penalties in a race that you are automatically disqualified?
Yeah, I think there is.
Okay, because I think there should be. If there's not, there should be, because what's just to say, like this is a perfect example this weekend, right? Of just Magnussen not giving a shit at that point about his penalties, that he just kind of drove a little abandoned, a little reckless, just to be able to work the Haas masterclass strategy at that point. But if he were to accumulate, I think if you get like 3 penalties in a race, you should be getting black flag out of the race, in my opinion.
Somebody tell us in the section below what it is. We'll come back to it. Let's kind of talk about some of the other teams that I think didn't really have the greatest of weekends. It looks like Mercedes is still haven't figured out their car. They looked like they were the 5th fastest car behind Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, and Aston Martin. Like, Lewis Hamilton took hopes from their speed in the mediums and the low speed corners, but it looked during those high speed turns, the car was bouncing around corners, and this is like race 2. And we all knew that this was going to be a track that a lot of teams that for speed, if they couldn't handle it, they were going to struggle. But yeah, sorry, what were your thoughts about Mercedes there?
Well, I was reading reports saying that how the data in the simulation is not transferring over into the car. Like that's bad. If you're not getting if your sim is telling you wrong, like what a wrong thing, then how are you going to be able to fix your car moving forward? And I think that's where the issue with with the cars, as you mentioned, they're just becoming very uncompetitive in the or non-competitive in kind of like some of these, high speed corners where there's bouncing, right? And you're kind of getting
Yeah.
overtaken. And I don't know. I do think Mercedes will end up being the fourth fastest car on the grid because I think we're in this position where Fernando Alonso again is making that car work like magic. This was a weekend where Aston Martin were able to keep them behind. But I think due to in large part with the high speed turns, and that's where they're gonna get that's where like Lewis is gonna get costed, and George is gonna get costed there too. And this is not the level of standard we are experiencing with Mercedes at all. And you're almost kind
No,
of questioning how the hell did they win 8 championships in a row?
this is probably the a year where I don't think that Mercedes is going to have a very good year, and kind of seen that not this disrunt, but like, George looked a little defeated. He reflects on a frustrating weekend, and the fact that like Lewis Hamilton even admitted he predicts challenging races ahead for Mercedes. And just think of like what tracks that we have coming up. We have Australia, which is wouldn't call Australia like an easy track for them, and then I don't know what's after that.
I think
Oh
it's
yeah, we have
Suzuka.
Japan.
Yeah, Suzuka
Yeah, we
after
have
that.
yeah, we have Japan after that, and then we're gonna have a new one that the drivers haven't raced there in 5 years, the Chinese Grand Prix, the Shanghai International Circuit. So Miami also has that one straightaway, which is like meant for speed. So, not easy circuits coming up for Mercedes for sure.
Having finish, it was I think P6 and P9. They get 10 points out of the weekend. But, a team like McLaren, they were able to score like 16 points. Oscar Piastri looked amazing this weekend, finishing P4.
Oscar like delivered the maximum he felt was on the table. Like be able to get that car up there and at least competitive, because they even admitted to Andrew that season was going to be a little bit of a struggle to their car. I think he was able to like get through Fernando Alonso early on, and then he was called in early with the safety car. And I think it just definitely wasn't called in early for the safety car, but I think he looked pretty promising, and I think a good momentum for him to go into Australia, which he's already released his helmet. I don't know if you had a chance to look at
No, I
that.
didn't see that. No, okay. No, I agree. I think, yeah, Oscar did as much as he could with the car. I think obviously the Red Bulls are, the fastest car. Charles would have been the next in that Ferrari. And then I think obviously McLaren were third fastest, and that was proven by Oscar this weekend. I do think though that McLaren did screw up Lando's strategy, because if they double
Yeah,
stacked him early, he would have finished P5, P6, I want to say, instead of P9 behind, where he had to take a late pit, right? With Lewis at that point, put on softs, and that kind of costed him some points at the end of the weekend.
and even again, like we saw this last weekend, is that a safety car? Some teams have definitely hoped for a safety car late on, and then we maybe just didn't. Like that was probably not the case.
Yeah.
And even he was not able to catch up with like Bearman's car there. Um, Also, like, I guess the question is like, what's going on with Kick Sauber, and I guess we'll get to V card later, but another slow pit stop for them,
I
and it
know.
was not even captured. It was not even captured on TV.
Yeah. So Joe, he battled up through, like he started, like both of them qualified horribly, right? I mean, horribly. Joe crashed in FP3, which then resulted him not being able to get onto the grid or not even, get a lap in for Q1. So he finished P20, and he didn't pit on the early safety car, which I think was smart, because at that point you have to kind of then hope for a late safety car. However, I thought he had pretty good pace in P11, all things considered, to the point where if he got tires in on at a relative time and at a relative, and a quick pit stop, he could have maybe then be able to fight through the field and get back that P11 position, right? However, like Sauber, I don't know what the hell they're doing over there. 50 some odd second pit stop last week with
The wheel gun or
with the
something.
wheel gun issue, and Valtteri, and then this was like a 30 like another wheel nut issue, like 37, 38 seconds. It wasn't caught on TV, but it was just, I'm like, you cannot have that happen once and then it happens again, let alone back-to-back weekends. I'm like, man, like that is embarrassing.
Well, even for Valtteri, like he had a decent start. There were some issues with his car that forced stalling, and then it forced him to brake, and like even dropped him down. I think down to what was it, like P17. So I mean, he dropped one position, but like still had no hope of like moving up. But
They have as much out hope as I do as Alpine. Like Alpine again were just brutal this weekend. Both cars booted out of qualifying early on. I think 1.3 seconds were off the pace, and then Pierre Gasly can't even get a chance to compete, with his gearbox issue, had an issue with synchronization on all gears. So after the formation lap, he was forced to retire, and now he sits P21 in a P20 in a P20 World Drivers Championship. John, I mean, we're talking the likes of like Latifi, Sargent.
this guy won a race before. He won a race.
I know, and that move to Alpine is looking worse and worse every day for that man.
I mean, yeah, like even Ocon was able to go from P17 to P13, but still, like, yeah, I could only imagine like he has probably no faith in his team right now.
I wouldn't. You go into a year where you try to change the concept. Everyone changes the concept to kind of match the RB19, and clearly they have done the worst job at it. But I do say this: if we're going to compare to I think it was Mercedes. Alpine were faster on the straights compared to Mercedes, and I'm like, if you're a Mercedes fan, that's kind of a little scary, don't you think? Like a car like Alpine, who's clearly inferior to yours, is beating you out on the straights.
Well, I just kind of realized this, but like with Oscar Piastri, like go back to Oscar Piastri's like with his fourth place finish, that puts McLaren now at P3 in the constructors at 28 points, ahead on Mercedes, Ferrari at 49, and Red Bull at 87. So I think it's still pretty competitive between Ferrari and Mercedes in terms of like, yeah, Ferrari does have a couple of points on it. Like, I'm curious to kind of see, like, we'll probably talk about it in our preview episode next week about like what to expect in Australia. And I think maybe the Australian drivers are probably going to be the ones with the most pressure on them. Well, the fact that Oscar's doing much better compared to Mr. Daniel Ricciardo. Helmut Marko is suggesting that like, Sergio Perez is doing fine and Daniel Ricciardo needs to pick it up.
Well, it does. Like these first two races have been abysmal for Daniel Ricciardo, who we thought had kind of has got the McLaren boogeyman off of him in terms of how he performed. And how last year when Horner was saying he's getting bad habits from McLaren and he was able to look fast in that Red Bull, but he's starting to look like the McLaren Danny Ricciardo in that V car. I think we're all kind of getting a little tired of his, those kind of antics and shenanigans. And again, this is kind of like the push for why Liam Lawson should probably have a seat in that team come next season in that case.
Well, not only that, or not, and then just like if Daniel goes, like, then I probably think there's probably no more positions for him, and I wonder if that like forces a retirement.
Oh yeah, like this is his last chance. Like this season's his last chance to get into a top car with Red Bull, and he's not doing enough right now to showcase why he should be in that P2 in that second driver's seat at Red Bull. Flat out.
Fernando Alonso, I don't know.
Well, I want to talk about, I think my team has had quite an interesting weekend. I think
we had one guy did really well, and then one guy's
which is really frustrating because we're now back at this point again where this race was kind of a microcosm of how last year's season overall went, where we had Fernando Alonso putting this, clearly the fastest car on the grid at this point into a kind of almost into a front row position, finishing P4 in qualifying, and then he was just able to during the final part of the race just hammer out like qualifying style type laps on those hards to keep George Russell at bay and finish P5. I thought that was an incredible drive for Fernando this weekend. Love seeing that from him. And then on the flip side of the coin, we had Lance Stroll, who was miles behind his teammate pretty much in qualifying, even though he got to Q3, he was far behind him in P10. And then during lap 7, he got it too aggressive, kissed the wall with the left tire, basically broke the suspension, and then lap 21 or turn 21, and then just put it into the into the barriers on 22, and it was so frustrating because you could see it on the race. They showed that they're showing like two cars driving and competing, and then all of a sudden you see Lance yeeting it across the runoff area into the barriers, and it's like, my God, man, he had such a promising return last week in terms of going from P20 to P10 because of getting hit, and then he just dropped the ball this weekend, and obviously it's going to make you worry as an Aston Martin fan because I think we do have the fifth fastest car, so we need to maximize every ounce of points we can get to ensure P5, maybe even challenge Mercedes for P4. And if we're going to keep doing the same thing like we did last year, there's no way we're going to be able to do that because it's basically going to be two drivers against one.
Well, yeah, Lance Stroll made Q3 for the second time in the last 12 races. He was still like 6 places, even though that like there were some issues in his final run on qualifying. But like, yeah, to lock up like that and to crash, like didn't really like help the case for him. And God only knows what the damage bills is already being racked up.
Yeah, and then I think for a team like Williams, just to touch on them, they had a pretty good weekend overall. I think it's tough, like in the sense that I think Alexander Albon started P12 and finished P11. Logan Sargent started P19, finished P14. So we were able to fight through the field, but I think just the change in the concept of the car. They're just going to struggle on trying to get the whole idea of this new balance. And I think this might be a challenging season for Williams in that way.
Well, yeah, I think that's the problem with all these like 4 bottom teams or 3. Like even we're seeing this in our fantasy, like the price drop, like it's a crapshoot who to take.
But it's funny to think that Ollie Bearman is going to have probably more points scored than a few people on the grid this year in one race.
You lose.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy to think that probably will happen.
Do you remember what our over and under was for Haas that we set up at the start of the year? Was it like 4.5?
I didn't even think they were going to score a point. So the fact that they got 1 point here is just exceeding my expectations in that case.
Fantasy. Who is winning in our pool right now?
So we got, I believe Tyler Hathroll is winning the pool right now, and out of us, I'm P5. With you being P10, I think Erica being P13. So I need you two jabronis to pick it up, okay?
You lose.
Okay, well, you know what?
No more taking Lance Stroll. No more taking Aston Martin constructors, okay? Learn your lessons from this past weekend. Let's continue on. This week, what my strategy was. I played like the autopilot, which gives the automatic ×2 DRS boost to the best driver that was on your team in terms of points. And I believe that ended up being Max. And then I 2-timed Charles Leclerc too. So I was able to, that was kind of like my strategy to get up to P5 this week on the points.
Yeah, you guys got to teach me this. I didn't even know about it. I just saw like half the grid have it and I didn't. Now I'm P11. Felipe Massa is going through with his lawsuit to try to seek damages or try to rewrite the
2008 championship. He's going to try and get it back. I don't know how that's going to happen. I understand there's a case for him against it, but it's overturned. I don't know if they're going to be able to turn it like 16 years later. Should be quite interesting, or if he just wants it overturned, if he just wants compensation for not being in, not winning that title that year.
He's asking for $82 million over quote unquote Crashgate.
Okay.
Bernie Ecclestone has responded. I just can't find it, but just see how this one goes. I think in the end of the day, like I don't personally see a change, but hey, we never know in this sport. But I could imagine a settlement is probably going to happen in terms of money.
Most likely, but I think that might then, if a settlement then happens, then it opens the door up for changing the records and stuff like that. And with Hamilton, when they go down to 6, or do they combine, like do they give like a co-championship away? Then at that point, only time will tell in that regards. I'm excited to be able to watch the Australian Grand Prix at a decent hour here in Canada.
Would it be midnight?
Yeah, it's midnight. Yeah, as opposed to like the 2 a.m. or the 1 a.m. that it was before. Those hours make a difference.
Yeah, and I guess it'll give us a week to kind of just see how much of the teams are coming. Like I think next week I'd be curious to see but these rumors about, Ferrari's apparently trying to make a lot of moves and trying to grab a lot of people from Red Bull. So let's give it a week before, let's give it a week to see what comes out in the news before we talk about it today. But let's end off here. This is season 4, episode 5 of the F1 podcast. Let's get ourselves to 1,000 followers, and we won't be at Trinity Common for the Australian Grand Prix, but the bar will be open. So please make a reservation, and support them. It will be a fun, who doesn't like watching a race Saturday night or Sunday morning at 12 o'clock. So with a couple of pints.
Yeah, exactly. Makes all worth more while. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening to season 4, episode 5 of the F1 podcast. Yes, myself, Andrew Cleary, along with the Honorable John Ricci. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode. Please follow us on Instagram. Please follow us on TikTok at f1.podcast, as well as please follow us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube to get all of our podcast content. We look forward to following up with everybody in the next week to see what moves has Ferrari made. We're going to preview the Australian Grand Prix to see who we think is going to be our top 3. Surprise, surprise, Max Verstappen's probably going to win again. But that more to come on next week's episode of the Australian Grand Prix preview. Again, I'm Andrew Cleary. This is the F1 podcast, and we will see you on the flip side. Take care.